Hello and welcome to GMBN Tech. Today is an Ask show where you guys use hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments of any of our videos, and that'll come directly to me or Doddy, and we'll try and answer it for you on a show like this. So don't forget to subscribe if you are new to these channels, and also give us a big old thumbs up, because why not? Okay, so let's jump into the first question. Finn Milner says, Ask GMBN Tech, can you use CO2 canisters like the ones from Muck-Off to inflate tubeless tyres? I am looking for a cheap and fast way to swap my tyres. Will this work? Because I have heard rumours that it will freeze the sealant. Thanks in advance. Technically, sort of yes and no. It won't freeze your sealant. Some sealant brands out there suggest that prolonged CO2 exposure can cause the sealant to separate. But some brands don't. They say it's fine with CO2. Muck-Off is actually one of them that says it's fine with CO2. However, if you do use a sealant that doesn't like being prolonged to exposure to CO2, what you can do is use your CO2 canister to inflate the tyre to get it on the rim. And once you're happy, you can let all of that CO2 out and just pump it up like a normal tyre with normal air with your track pump or your hand pump or something like that. Also, you've mentioned a cheap and fast way. I've just got to say, Cannisters, you know, this tubey booster from Topeak is like just such a brilliant alternative to CO2. It's effectively a rechargeable CO2 canister anyway. What you do, you just attach your pump to the canister, you charge it full of air, it becomes compressed, and then you just pull the lever and it releases it out into your tyre, much like a CO2. All of that pressure inflates it really quick, but hey, it's not used CO2, so it won't separate any sealant, you won't have to let it out and redo it, and also you won't be throwing away metal canisters every time you use them and having to buy replacements. It's just a one size fits all, and you can actually make those out of old 2-litre bottles, but it's super fiddly, not as reliable or as durable, so maybe consider something like this in the future. So, Bojan Harnovsky, sorry. What is the quickest way on a trail if positioning your steerer tube perfectly 90 degrees to the front wheel? I find it constantly a bit askew after knocking my bike or after a crash. It's frustrating to position it once, only to discover a few meters down that it's pulled sideways. Okay, so two things here. One is, if you're knocking your bike and your handles are moving like constantly, you might want to consider retightening up your stem bolts onto the steerer, because it shouldn't move like that. Get a Torx wrench if you've got one, or borrow one from a friend if you don't want to purchase one, and make sure those bolts are torqued up, because it shouldn't be moving under knocking. Fair enough, if you're crashing, it might move the wheel and the handlebars out of line. And in that case, my answer to your question is I like to stand over the front wheel and to look at the handlebars and line it up to the crown of your forks. So this part of your forks will line up to your handlebars. I do that. I find it's easier, certainly if you have really short stems, to see the two together. But also I find it more accurate, because if you line up your stem with your tyre, if your tyre's off, or if you've got a lot of cables or controls in the way, it might not be super accurate. So yeah, so stand over it and line up the crown to the handlebars, and also check those bolts to make sure they're nice and tight anyway. Bergie says, recently, I found a good offer for a hardtail 160mm fork with a 64-degree head angle, but is that too radical? Would it be for trail type riding, including climbing and going for bike trips? At the moment, I'm riding classic XC bike, a hardtail 100mm fork with 71-degree head angle. and I would like to change to something a bit more aggressive, but I'm afraid that this bike I've described would be too much and impossible to climb with. And then you've asked what's the sweet spot for an all-rounder. So you're going from a 71-degree head angle XC bike with 100 mils and looking at this 160 mil fork with a 64-degree angle. So just so you know, that's about the same head angle and travel on my Nuke-Proof Mega, which is very definitely a enduro bike. So you've said a bit more aggressive. If you're not doing enduro racing on this bike and you're not doing steep descents, it might be a little bit too much. But I don't get on the Nuke-Proof Mega and find that it's difficult to climb. It's just a little bit more sluggish for that style of riding, or for sort of classic XC, as you put it. I wouldn't want to ride that for classic XC. So if you want classic XC that is a little bit more aggressive, I would probably go for something between the two of those. So your 71-degree XC head angle and your 74-degree enduro bike, somewhere in the middle would be more appropriate for you to get more of a little bit more aggressive, but still be able to do those big out there rides. So for example, my Scout is a 65 to 67 degree head angle, depending on whether you've got 130 mils or 150 mils of travel. And I've actually raced that at an enduro, and it obviously didn't feel as good as my Mega, but it was capable, very, very capable. And yet I can still pull all day rides on that hardtail. So my point is, trail bikes are so good these days, in terms of the way they perform and the geometry and the suspension, that you can push them quite far in terms of aggressive riding, but they are still really good responsive bikes for your all-day rides. So I guess the short answer is it might be a little bit too aggressive for you, but maybe try and explore some trail bikes instead, like something like the Nuke-Proof Scout perhaps. So Jeff Blauvelt says, hi Anna Doddy. I was wondering what you guys think of titanium frames. Are they as good as carbon or alloy for enduro and DH or downhill? Any downsides compared to the more mainstream materials? No, is there any downsides? No, Tyre is absolutely beautiful. It's such a lovely ride. I've ridden a lot of steel bikes in the past and I love them. Tyre is very similar. If you've ever ridden steel, it's got that nice dampened quality, especially as you want to ride enduro and downhill on a hardtail. You want to, something that's going to dampen those vibrations and be a bit more compliant to stop the fatigue on descents. So steel and Tyre, I would very much recommend for a hardtail of that kind of nature. It would be better than aluminium, which can be a little bit fatiguing, a little bit jarring. And carbon, also can be a little bit jarring and stiff, depending on whether the brand has made it to be that way or made it to be a little bit compliant. But in answering your question, is there any downsides to it? No, other than it's expensive. It can be more expensive than carbon. So that is a downside if you don't have the budget for it. But when I go to downhill and enduro races, I notice that the guys who are choosing hardtails tend to be probably a 50-50 split between steel hardtails, like a Kotick Beefy or a Marin Elroy or something like that, which are great budget-friendly steel hardtail thrashers. And the other split is like a titanium hardtail, something like the Stanton Switchback Tyre is a really popular bike, just because it's super slack geometry, long travel, and they do really good things with their bikes. What I will say, it's not particularly a downside, but titanium as a material is quite technical to weld and to put together. And I would trust an experienced Tyre builder for it. So when you're looking at your Tyre frames, do some research into who's using them, go onto forums and go onto social media groups and see have they got a good history in reliability, or is there some, you know, regular weld problems creeping up on this brand's particular forum or web page, because I would steer clear of them when it comes to downhill and enduro. But generally, if they're making a downhill and enduro hardtail out of Tyre, they probably know what they're doing. And I wouldn't say there's any real downside other than your budget. So DZig says, just bought a 2020 Levo Comp Carbon, which was spec'd with Fox Rhythm front fork with a grip damper. I have a Pike Ultimate 2022, which I can bump up to 160 millimeters. But it has 35 mil stanchions, whereas the Fox has 36 mil stanchions. Do I swap it or do I leave it? I know I could just try it, but what do you think? Yeah, well, you can just try it, and you know, it's personal preference here, because obviously you've mentioned Fox has 36 mil stanchions and the RockShox has 35. That millimeter you're probably not going to notice at all. What you will notice is the difference between RockShox and Fox. They do feel very different. Certainly the dampers are quite different. If you've got the Grip 2 damper on there, I absolutely love that damper. It is just beautiful. I would choose that over a Pike Ultimate. I do have a Pike Ultimate on my Scout and they work perfectly fine. They are great. It's personal preference that I prefer the Fox 36 with the Grip 2 damper. But Doddy is probably the opposite. He is a big RockShox fan and he loves that Pike, and he would choose it over a Fox 36. So I can't really answer your question because it's like trying to guess what you're going to like on your bike. But obviously try out the Fox first because it's there and you don't have to change the travel. And then, you know, if you don't like it, then you can change the RockShox to 160s and put them on. So Steve Wenzel said, hi Doddy and Anna, I have a new old stock Yeti Arc. Oof, I always wanted one of those. Hardtail XC race frame that I'd like to build up. The problem currently being a lack of 12 by 142 rear wheel size. Although I haven't heard or seen anyone running this combination. I heard Doddy briefly jokingly referring to running a gravel bike wheel a couple of weeks ago on the show. Just wondering if durability would be the main con of this on an XC race bike. Any other thoughts on this? So in theory, if you're buying a gravel wheel to put in your XC bike, assuming they are the exact same spec and dimensions, then in theory, no, there shouldn't be any problem. But the reality is that gravel wheels do tend to be a slightly different spec than XC, and you're going to have to do your research into what the differences are between the two wheels that you're looking at, because gravel rims tend to be a little bit narrower in terms of internal width, which means you can then only run smaller width tyres. A lot of them top out at 2-inch or 2.2-inch tyres, maybe if you're lucky on a gravel wheel. So if you're wanting to run anything bigger than that, which you might not on a new old stock Yeti Arc, then that would be a downside. Also, spoke count might be of a consideration. XC wheels tend to have more spokes, so they're a little bit stronger and more reliable if any spokes should go. If you have fewer, say an XC bike might have 28, a gravel bike might have 24. So if 1 out of 24 spokes go, that's a bigger surface area that's going to be out of whack and needing some real attention. So I guess it depends what you're looking for, whether those spec differences matter to you, and what you're going to be doing on your Yeti Arc. I mean, if you're going to be gravel riding, then on it, then it's probably no big bother. But if you're going to be doing proper XC on it, I don't know, you might want an XC one if you get the better tyre choice and spoke count. And that is my opinion, basically. And that's all we've got time for. So hopefully I've helped you guys, and give us a big old thumbs up. And if you have any more questions, then always use hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments, and we'll see you again another time.